Chapter 1841. Sidetracked Conversation. The Black Dragon soon realized that he had been sidetracked. How did this turn into questioning me about the best ways to develop fundamental rules? You've all mastered one. You don't need to practice them for quite some time. Rue shrugged. You have answers, and the Darklight host loves questions. That's just how things are here. When I arrived, they wanted my whole life story. Carl chuckled. While that was true, it was not the whole story. He had only wanted the story because he hadn't seen her in 10,000 years. If he hadn't met her before, there would have been at least a few less questions for her to answer, and Carl wouldn't have pushed to get her backstory, since so many of the immortals had a tragic past that they would rather keep to themselves. If he didn't know better, he would think that those character-building moments were actually necessary to reach immortality. And even though he did know better, he was still tempted to look into it, just in case it helped. Well, you were sent here to learn a bit more about the Darklight host, so you could make sure that Lotus wasn't going to be mistreating Tenna in the future. I suppose that this is one of the many ways to introduce you to both the guild and Lotus herself. If you had been briefed by the Black Dragons in our guild, it might have saved you some moments of concern, but honestly, an avatar from the Divine Realms asking random dragons scattered across many worlds is a terribly ineffective method of intelligence gathering. The avatar shrugged. I'm more surprised that they bothered to send me at all. I know that you've continued down a path toward bonding with a dragon for some time, and multiple visits haven't dissuaded you. But sending a divine avatar seems excessive. I'm sure that it's something related to the oracles and their visions, things that might happen if you were bonded to a dragon, but they insist that if I knew the future, I would change it into something unintended, and they would have to start all over. Carl laughed. They're trying to guide the fate of someone who has randomized as both a crafting skill and a spell modifier? I don't envy their job. You know, I'm beginning to understand why the mere mention of your guild makes the Oracle Core day drink. Carl chuckled. I got that impression from the members of the other branches that I've met. And not just the branch that is run by a legendary Chaos Dragon. You know, according to the information I have, the Darklight host is one of the oldest guilds in existence as they operate across multiple different systems. That is exceptionally rare. Some guilds spread between worlds, but almost always ones with compatible systems, like your home world and this one. When you can see the system information of both worlds, integration is easy. But the listings that I have here for the Darklight host include worlds that have systems that have nothing at all in common with the others. One's based on mythical cultivation methods, systems created by and aligned to two different gods, and some worlds where the growth method doesn't even appear to be a system as most would understand the word. It should be one, it's just not normal. Lotus handed Ophelia Tifa so she could focus on the conversation. Or on brushing Tian. I heard that this guild is actually older than the World Dragon. Someone told me that the guild originally started under the Laughing God, and then expanded to the worlds that the World Dragon gifted his systems to. That could very well be true. It's before my time, for certain. But I'm still relatively young. What I can say is that the dragon gods would know. But they rarely give details or explanations for their instructions. We obey on faith. Lotus giggled. Well, if they were willing to answer questions, they would never get anything done. I tried to do the math of how long it would take for them to answer all the questions of just the faithful on one world before I knew that there were other worlds. And it's a lot of people they'd have to answer at once. You gave up halfway through, didn't you? I didn't even make it halfway. But I have a question. Do you have a guild? Like, do you lead a whole bunch of dragons? Or do you just wander around taking care of tasks? You said that you used to be a seeker, but do you still do seeker sorts of stuff? Normally, I don't do seeker-type things anymore. But most avatars were never seekers, so I still get a bit of it. One thing that you will find as you grow, there is no such thing as retirement. Once you have done something, you will always be called upon to do it again, at some point. Take Lotus, for example. She was a priestess of the Green Dragon, so she will be called upon to heal and repair nature. But now that she has taken up the mantle of the Beast Master, there is no changing the fact that she will be asked in the future to help beasts. Even without spaces open to bond them, her goddess will naturally want to take care of beast-related issues now that she has volunteered. It's a bit like having your name written on the employee rolls with permanent ink. Lotus laughed, and the black avatar patted her on the head. I know that sounds like a wonderful thing to you. It likely will be, given your nature. It's more of a warning about taking future paths under pressure. Doing things that go against your nature only leads to you having to do them all the time, so be careful what path you choose in the future. Got it. No doing annoying things. Ophelia sighed. I think she missed the most important parts of that, but I will keep it in mind for her. Chapter 1842. Same, but different. Carl and Rue worked silently as the group chatted, pumping out gear for the store as fast as they could. Rare grade items could easily be mass-produced with the runes already on them, but epic grade items took a bit of tweaking to make them perfect and account for flaws in the base material before they were completed. Even so, they were still making a new item every few minutes, and the pile was beginning to grow beside them, which drew the attention of the Black Dragon. Are you planning to go to war? He asked. No, these are for our guild shop. There is a recruitment event for the new home merchant clan, and hundreds of other small clans have come to see if they can find the perfect recruit. These items are sold as bribes to help them recruit new members. If they don't have an appropriate gift to bring the new member in, it's difficult to convince a young immortal to join them, even if they're a good fit. So we offer suitable items, and they use them to get members. You're not afraid that it's stealing members from your guild or the new home, which you are allied with? Not at all. In fact, the majority will still go to the new home merchant clan, and those other clans would still find a way to recruit the ones that they wanted. This way, we get to profit off the recruits that we don't even have to train. That's just devious. You already know that they're not a good fit for your clan. They only came because the recruitment is the best place for them to find a master, but you're still finding ways to profit off them. It's a surprise that the new home merchant clan isn't larger, given its tactics.
Carl shook his head.
Clan leader Nerissa is actually quite discerning who she takes, but she also prefers recruits from the mortal worlds, or those born within her clan. It keeps that sense of family, as so many came from other worlds that they have something to bond them, instead of being outsiders in a clan that looks down on them. Ah, one of those. I have encountered many such clans after entering the divine realms as well. Mostly, they prey on newly ascended demigods, but some of them are genuinely hoping to build the power of the pantheons that they represent. That's why I aligned with the one that I did. We are all servants of the Black Dragon, so while we're all working on our own ways to reach divinity, we are all very similar personalities. That sounded more than a little extreme to Carl. Not just followers of the Dragon Pantheon, his entire clan was filled with Black Dragon followers? Though, that still wasn't as extreme as most of the Immortal Realm clans that only followed one specific build of one specific class. So perhaps the outlier here was him, and his view that a guild should have a little bit of everything just to keep it interesting. Leo came to sit with the group and waved to their new addition. Hello, Mr. Dragon. If you're all Black Dragon followers, who decides who is in charge? Like, you're all doing the same job, and you're all going for the same goal, right? So, is it just whoever is the most powerful? That's how most of the groups here do it, but it seems dumb because powerful and smart aren't the same thing. The dragon actually laughed out loud at the innocent little turtle. You are absolutely right. But when they're powerful, nobody can stop them from being powerfully stupid. So, they do as they please, and others try to emulate them because they are powerful. Leo sighed. One day I will be big, and people will look up to me. Because you can fly? Leo paused for a second, shocked that the Black Dragon avatar had made a joke. Then, a slow smile spread across his face.
Yep.
I will be huge and flying, and even the dragons will be impressed. The avatar nodded seriously. Well, if you can keep up with the Great Turtle, the dragons will definitely be impressed. The Great Turtle? He's a god of the Beast Pantheon. Hangs out with this snake girl all the time. But he's the size of a continent. Very impressive if I do say so myself. Oh, know the one you mean. Have I been too narrow-minded? Are snake girls friendly? I don't think I know any snake girls. The avatar winked at Leo. When you grow up, you'll find out that snake girls can be very friendly, but they can also be very sneaky and mean, so you need to be careful and find the right one if you want to make lifelong friends. Leo nodded as he took in this sage new advice. I will remember that. Humans can be sneaky too. There is a boy at school that is always lying and trying to cause trouble for others. My friend Cindy Lou warned me that he was a bad person, so I didn't get fooled when he tried to get me in trouble. She is human, but she got her class at only 8 years old. The Avatar was truly impressed by that. Earlier awakenings usually meant higher potential, so if a human could awaken before puberty, they were definitely going to grow into someone who could achieve great things. As long as they didn't die young. Did she get a good class? She's a druid. They won't let us go out on missions yet, since Cindy Lou doesn't have an immortal spirit yet, but I talked to the matron, and she thinks that we can train in the tower here in the tiny world when we have days off. Ruth smiled at the excited little turtle. I will work with Carl to upgrade it so that all the immortals can use it, and you don't have to hold back. Then we can bring all our friends and go as a group. That will be so fun. I will have them ask their moms tomorrow. Chapter 1843. Empty the Tower. The concept of a trial tower was one that greatly intrigued the Black Dragon Avatar. He had seen them, everyone had, but not many knew the trick to making them. It wasn't a matter of a lack of power. Demigods had more than enough power to do nearly whatever they wanted. The difference was in the knowledge. There was something missing in most people's knowledge, so even if they learned to read the language of the ancients, they couldn't replicate their creations. And he didn't have the runecrafting skill, so he couldn't do it that way. He was assuming the second option was how they had done it here, as an actual ancient Luce in the immortal worlds would have caused a much bigger uproar than his god sending him here to ensure that the hatchlings were not led astray by a follower of the world dragon. Already, he could tell that Carl was intending to follow their agreement to the letter and just ignore the spirit of the warning behind it. But for a follower of the world dragon, that was already better than expected. Most of the time, they would make an agreement, then immediately think of a dozen ways to circumvent it so they could do what they wanted without technically breaking it. Naturally, Carl had already done that, but he had decided that it was best if he simply went along with the Black Dragon God's plans for his children. Picking unnecessary fights with the god of death simply didn't seem like a good idea. That didn't mean he would extend the prohibition to the rest of his team, though. Besides, Thor was teaching Tenna to use the Eternal Lightning Barrier, and the Divine Lightning Dragon was a natural study. They weren't even going to have to make a skill book or use Follow Me Little One to teach it to her. That would upgrade her basic skills and make Lotus even more durable. With immunity to physical attacks, Eternal Lightning, and her physique buffed by both the Spirit Bear and a dragon, Lotus would soon be one of the most difficult to damage green dragon followers in history. In fact, she could likely pet most of the unpettable things without even using any skills. Their natural response would be to attack with claws, and Lotus was immune to that, so she could just ignore it. And if she could ignore the claws, it wouldn't be long before she could pet it. They could see the trial tower from where they were sitting, and the fact that there were people outside waiting and chatting between trips through it to build their skills. It was only made for mortals, so the ones using it were those still stuck at mythic rank. But that was enough for them, as they weren't particularly interested in building their combat skills beyond the immortal rank at the moment, and mostly just needed to get a solid base for tribulation. Once they had that, once their bodies and skills could withstand the lightning and the changes that came with it, they were content. For the bunnies and the ones who had been kept by the octopus and its minions, that was enough. They didn't even dare dream to be powerful immortals, they just wanted to be seen as actual people in the immortal worlds. The approach of Carl and Rue brought more of them scurrying over, and Carl raised his hand to get their attention. Once everyone is out of the trial, we'll shut it down for a few minutes while Lady Rue upgrades it. Once that is done, even those of you who are immortals will be able to use the tower at your full capability, and that should help you start forming your immortal spirit. The targets you find inside will have one, so if you're learning by combat, you can do it that way. However, I will also alter the trial a little to add mental challenges so that you can directly use it as a training resource for your immortal spirit. I know how most of you feel about fighting. That made the bunnies laugh. Only the handful who had evolved would even dream of going into the trial tower. The rest were not fighters. But if they could learn how to reach immortality, or to advance after they were immortals, that would be wonderful, and they could help out so much more around the tiny world. That was the most important part to the bunnies. They had to be helpful. There were no other acceptable ways to behave in their minds. Not after generations of selective training, where only the most compliant survived. Now, they didn't even long for power for themselves. They just wanted to be viewed as actual helpful members of the Darklight host, who had taken them in. Technically, they already were, and among the most powerful, as they were all mythic ranked. But that was just the mortal realm branch. They wanted to help all the branches. Having a whole new guild house that didn't have bunnies there to maintain it felt wrong, no matter how many Lycans were there. Perhaps they could find a way to do their work when the wolves were not around? They were terrifying. The last few members left the tower and got an update on the situation from the others waiting outside, but nobody sent a message about the tower closing so that they didn't interrupt or cause someone to fail a trial that might have led to them learning something valuable. The right timing was everything. Alright, I will get started. I've been writing down the changes I want to make for this to be a place of learning and puzzles as well as combat. And then I will give that information to Lady Rue, and she will upgrade the whole thing to the supreme rank, Carl explained. The Black Dragon avatar watched with rapt attention. He would memorize and record everything and bring that information back to his own people so that they could make something like this to train their immortal members as well. He could read the runic languages and his memory was good, so they would only have to adapt what he showed them to a functional design that would produce the required output. The runes were only half the challenge after all. Chapter 1844. Fundamental Realization. Carl began the work of deactivating the tower, so it was no longer considered an immortal rank magical item, and then began layering the extra runes that he wanted onto the stones of the tower, adding the extra functions to study and create mental puzzles. Those were all fairly simple additions, as they were just changes to the options for the existing trials within the towers, and the change was as much about intent as it was about the actual runes. But that was where things could get tricky. If Rue didn't fully understand what Carl was trying to do with the tower, then there was a good chance that her upgrade attempt would fail, or she would only manage to upgrade a portion of the trial. Though, even if she just upgraded the combat trials, that would likely be enough, as they were the only ones that involved dealing damage. Rue watched as Carl upgraded the tower, and then read the system message that he sent her, detailing the changes that he was making so that he didn't have to explain it out loud for everyone to hear. Keeping some things to themselves was better. If the Avatar was going to watch everything so that he could pass it on to his own people, they would make him guess about some of the aspects. It might actually be better, as it would lead to innovation, and the demigods of his clan would certainly have at least a few unique ideas about how a trial tower should work. And if they had new ideas about how it should work, then Carl could use those ideas the next time that he made a tower after seeing them. He knew his own limitations in the realms of creativity. He wouldn't presume that he had more unique and effective ideas than everyone else combined. Far from it. In fact, it appeared that he wasn't even going to be considered the most innovative in this branch of the guild, as Kara and Rue were conferring about changes to make to the tower as it was improved to the supreme rank. They were trying to hide their conversations, but Kara wasn't that good at hiding her thoughts when she was talking to other people, and Carl suspected that she was keeping them open so that she could get additional input from Ray on the topic of trial alterations. They had both helped with the original building of the tower, but now they had more ideas about what could be added to it, and little things that could be changed to make the trials more exciting, since they were rebuilding it anyhow. Carl had made the basic changes to the runes, as he had done the first set, and understood them best. But Rue would be the one that made the finalized version, as she was the one at supreme rank, so her vision would be the one that created the finalized trial. And while Carl had many great ideas about trials, Rue had spent thousands of years at war in the immortal realms, and her knowledge of battle tactics was far superior to what anyone else in the group possessed. With that extra experience, she could make trials that would test the group in all new ways, forcing them to think in new ways and making the upper levels difficult on a level that was completely unrelated to the actual targets. Scenarios that were designed to be similar to the most effective traps she had experienced or learned about, where trial targets had complementary abilities that could overlap into something unexpected or use terrain in unexpected ways, would make the entire experience far more realistic. The tower would no longer be a simple test of power, but also of intelligence, adaptability, tactics, and versatility. Not every class would even be capable of reaching the top levels anymore, no matter how overpowered they were in theory. If they didn't have the range of skills to overcome the worst things that Rue and her faction had survived, they wouldn't ever pass. And then there were the puzzles. Carl had implemented many great ones that would help with comprehension, but Rue had learned in a different way, so they would have two different sets of training scenarios, as well as a wider variety of challenges for everyone to work through. It would be great if they could con the Avatar into adding his vast knowledge of progression to the tower, but that seemed like far too much to ask of someone who actually been sent to keep them from doing weird things that would lead the dragons astray. Put that way, this was likely one of those things, but Rue is a dragon as well, so it might not count. Everyone watched as Kara gestured wildly, trying to explain a concept that simply shouldn't exist in this reality, while Rue laughed and made counterpoints. She was a void dragon, and while it wasn't fully chaos-aligned, she did understand enough that she seemed to grasp the basics of what Kara wanted. That was more than what Carl would have expected of most people, and he was looking forward to seeing what they came up with for the tower. After half an hour of channeling mana, making small alterations to the runes, and adding a few new connected clauses, Rue was ready to finalize the new tower. All that she needed was power. There are mana stones all around the main building. They're mostly for the residents to train and recover, but you can use them freely. They'll recover on their own, given time. Just don't deplete them to nothing, and everything will run smoothly. I made enough of them that they regenerate more than the world passively uses. Carl explained. The Avatar turned toward the Guild House replica in shock. He had felt the mana repository, but he hadn't realized that it was all mana stones that Carl had created. He had assumed that it was a divine treasure. And with that realization came a secondary realization. Divine beings radiated divine power with every breath. Power that was being absorbed into the tiny world, because that's what this world was designed to do by an immortal who had mastered mana manipulation on the level of the fundamental rules. And that would change everything for the residents of the tiny world if he stayed here doing his job for much longer. Chapter 1845 of History and Feuds. While the dragon was becoming concerned about the changes that his presence could be making to the tiny world, he also realized that there was another thing that he should be worried about. A Chaos Badger conspiring with a supreme-ranked dragon to create a trial tower with random puzzles and trials. While it was not something that concerned his god directly, and it wasn't likely to get anyone killed if he allowed it to continue, there was a very good chance that someone was going to stumble across forbidden knowledge in that tower. Anything that involved chaos and training tended to appeal to the Laughing God, the creator pantheon's god of mischief and pranks. He was also a system god, who made many systems for different worlds. In a way, the Avatar felt sorry for them, even if they were better off than they would have been without a system at all. Having a system that loved to troll you was a true nightmare for the Black Dragon. The problem was that while he had committed most of the array to memory, the way that the runes interacted was a mystery to him. They were overlaid in so many different patterns, it wasn't like reading from a tome. You had to understand the art behind them to understand all the actual phrases, so mostly he was trying to memorize nonsensical strings of words that were intended to complete clauses near them. He didn't understand, but he did his best to memorize so that the others would get an idea of how the Darklight host was making their training equipment. Perhaps it would be useful. The tower completed with a flash of impossible colored light, and Kara laughed victoriously as Randomize settled in over the tower, expanding the trials far beyond what they had directly designed. It would only operate within the parameters that they had given it, so nobody would die within the tower. But if the puzzles and training areas were fully randomized by the system, they would no longer be limited to the knowledge that the creators had. Now, it should be able to teach them whatever it was that they were aligned with, so it could help all the mortals to ascend to immortality. The Black Avatar stared at the tower, examining the magical aura of the place, which was much easier at his power level than trying to understand how it was made. Mana fluctuations to a divine being were no more complex than watching the swirling flow of a river. Too much, and you couldn't follow it all, but you could still get a good idea of the basic current patterns. Oh, that is a lovely training tower. I can feel the concentrated energy inside of it. If anything, I think that it might actually be more valuable to immortals who are operating without a system or on a concentrated growth path than an experience-based system, he noted. Ours isn't an experience-based system that I know of. I've never seen it mention experience anyhow, Carl noted. The dragon examined him for a second. Yours is a bit odd. It's not explicitly experience-based, but you still grow with life experience. For a pure concentrated growth system, even if they killed 1,000,000 monsters, they wouldn't get anywhere if they didn't follow their training method to enhance their power. Carl frowned. What a nightmare of a system. What do you do if you can't get the resources you need, or you're injured and can't perform whatever spell or ritual you need? Do you just lay there and wait to recover, knowing that there is nothing you can do? More or less. Many of them are here in this world. Even in the new home merchant clan. Some of them have been looking for centuries for a particular item, a bit of knowledge or an opportunity that will let them advance again. That sort of system needs much more patience than one that grows with practice. Oh, that makes sense. We definitely grow with practice. In fact, that was the basic method at the academy where we started out. Practice your skills until they were second nature, and then push yourself to maximize power to advance. Then learn more skills, repeat, and expand your base. It worked out pretty well to create well-rounded fighters when the giants attacked. The Black Dragon laughed. That is a never-ending feud, I tell you. The giants and the dragons rarely get along. But the giants and the creators? That feud is practically baked into their genetics at this point. They will never forget and never forgive. Aren't the creators supposed to be from multiple different species? How could every giant have a grudge against them? The Black Dragon waved his hand. That story is far too long. But as I understand the basics, it started when the creator's god of death was attacked by titans and destroyed one of their planets in retaliation. Things snowballed from there. There is far more to it, but that's the basic premise of the feud. Both sides feel justified in their hatred, and because the gods hold a grudge, the two sides are constantly at each other's throats.
Carl sighed.
Who knew that even the gods held grudges? Nobody holds grudges quite like the gods. You see, there are so few major gods that they never forget slights from each other. Once one of them has a true feud going on, it can last hundreds of thousands of years. It usually feels like a short spat to them, but for the rest of us, it's often so long that we don't remember it ever being another way. The feud between the creators and the titans, though, that is different. Even the various seer classes, the oracles and foretellers, they all talk about how such a feud will never be resolved. Carl shrugged. Well, the feuds of the gods are still far beyond my pay grade. You might be close enough that it directly affects you, but for us, it's more of an abstract concept. The giants are a nuisance species in general, regardless of the reason. That made the Avatar laugh. See, that's the side effect of the feud. For those not aligned with the creators, the giants don't seem as reprehensible. Chapter 1846, Children of the Fertility God. Why don't we send some of the bunnies in to test the system? They can pick the new training and educational options to be sure that they work. If it glitches, they can just come right back out without fighting. Rue suggested. The bunnies rushed forward, then stopped. How many of us can go inside at once? About 20. If it's a combat stage, it takes more magic and more of the space. But if you're all doing training areas and puzzles, they're smaller, so more can go. But 20 at once should be fine, no matter what everyone is doing. With that, the bunnies rushed for the tower, which pulsed with light as they entered. The lights on the tower started at the bottom, showing that they were on the first stage of the trial, and slowly moved around the tower as the space began to fill. That was a convenient feature that Rue hadn't even intended to add. What are the odds that they're all doing puzzles? Thor asked as he watched the tower fill. The Black Dragon snorted in amusement. I would say 9 chances in 10. One of them might be trying to advance a skill to be more helpful to the group, but bunnies absolutely love puzzles. The children of the fertility goddess, who is a bunny, often spend all day doing puzzles and playing games. If you present them a new puzzle to solve, it will make their entire month. So, even here in the immortal realm, the bunnies should be the same. Lotus laughed, then snuggled her face into Tifa's fur. So, bunnies are just like that all the time? Like, I thought it was some sort of trauma thing that made them want to be helpful all the time. The Black Dragon shook his head. No, they're like that. Bunnies love being helpful the way that green dragon clerics love fluffy things and chocolate. There is no bunny that doesn't love being helpful. I'm willing to wager that even the ones who evolved into jackalopes and got warrior classes did it so that they could be helpful to the group and fill a role that they were relying on others for. Right in one. That is exactly why they did it. I must say, though, the Bloodstrike jackalope is exceptionally rare and powerful. When it comes to evolution, they're exceptionally well-suited. And those ones seem to be blood knights, so they have natural life leech and regeneration, meaning that they don't impose on others to keep them healed. That's very nearly peak bunny. The only thing that could be more in tune with the nature of their species would be if there were some male bunnies here, so they could protect the den and the little ones. Though, I suppose that you have the orphanage so they can protect the hatchlings until there are baby bunnies. One of the bunnies made a startled gasping noise, and Carl noticed her fidgeting. Did we miss something? Well, you see, there are male bunnies here. The golems that you made for the spa area. Do those even count? I think so. Either it's them or it's one of the other epic golem-type summons, but we've got more than a few pregnant bunnies. Carl chuckled, and the black dragon avatar shook his head in dismay. You made golems so realistic that they can reproduce? It's the epic golem spell, altered a bit to expand their skills and make them more useful around the tiny world. The base spell summons a clone of an actual person, but I never considered them to be living beings in that way. The avatar smiled. They're not. However, they are fully capable. The thing is that they're made of pure mana, so their offspring might be a bit odd. Either they'll be purely bunnies, as the other partner is essentially a mana elemental given form, or they'll be some odd hybrid. If the form was a bunny, things should be normal. But what were the other options? The bunny looked uncomfortable, and Carl winked at her. There are actually a few other options here. We've got a couple demon lords, copies of Carnage, and Oathbreaker. Then there are the pet sitters. There are dark elven priestesses, but they should be free from suspicion on this front. The last would be the male bunnies and the Leakenpool boys. The black dragon avatar considered the options. All of those except one could lead to outcomes that were not on the list of normal hybrid species. Usually one bloodline would dominate the other, and bunnies usually only came from two bunny parents. The exception would be lichens and other beastkin, which could blend in either direction. However, if the bunnies were breeding with Carnage or Oathbreaker, it sounded improbable, as neither of those demons was known as the lustful sort. But the offspring could be ridiculously powerful. They both came from divine bloodlines, named after an exceptional member of their ancestry who had reached the rank of demigod and made such a name for themselves that the entire divine realm remembered them. He had to admit, he was more than a little curious what the bunnies got up to when you left them unsupervised. Normally, they either lived in temples to their goddess, or they were indentured servants to other groups, since they were so bad at standing up for themselves. So, their population tended to be so segregated that clans had to arrange dating events just to maintain their numbers. Even here in the tiny world, they had taken nearly all female bunnies. That didn't appear to be a deliberate choice. He could feel from their auras that they had come from different locations and weren't raised here. That meant Carl had likely taken them as spoils of war. But they were happy here. He would just have to warn Carl about the population explosion if the bunnies had found willing partners here in the tiny world. They didn't have 1 or 2 children at a time. 6 to 10 was the normal number for their species. Then, he noticed that the silver dragon standing on the far side of the tower was doing his best to look innocent, like he wasn't involved in this conversation. So, that was at least one of the incidences down. He would have a chat with that dragon later. Chapter 1847. Suspects. All that the group could do was wait for the first round of bunnies to come back out, but that gave them plenty of time to speculate on just who the father of their upcoming baby bunnies might be. There were many theories, mostly about the various enhanced golems that were in the tiny world. But that was mostly because the living males were in limited supply. Rashid and Oben, the 2 bronze dragons, were possible options, but that seemed unlikely. Librarian Ike was a fan favorite, mostly because he would read stories for the bunnies, and Lotus thought it was adorable. Raced, the silver dragon, was clearly one of the culprits, despite his refusal to admit to anything. But other than that, there was just Axel, the patron of the orphanage, and Thor. Both of them were taken men, and even the bunnies waiting for their turn were adamant that no such thing would happen. So, the most likely options were the enhanced golems that Carl had made. Sitting in the library with a sleeping bunny draped across his lap, her head on the armrest and her back serving as a book rest, Ike sneezed. Someone was obviously talking about him behind his back, but he had no idea what they might be saying. They were out of range of his mind-reading abilities, and the only other person nearby was sleeping. The bunny was dreaming of the new species of radishes that had been introduced to the gardens, so it definitely wasn't her that was plotting against his reputation. He strongly suspected that it was either Raced, who loved to compile notes for the library to organize, or Opal had come up with another of her fan fictions. That Faye was a menace to a good man's reputation. Opal laughed as she saw the suspicion on the blue dragon's face. This footage was definitely going into her next film. Perhaps after she altered the outfits a little. If the blue dragon didn't want her to ship him with the bunnies, he had to stop giving her reasons to ship him with the bunnies. And that wasn't going to happen. They loved story time. But Opal was also curious about which of the constructs had managed to impregnate the bunnies. If she knew that, she would know how to tweak future creations so that they were either more or less fertile depending on customer requests. That could actually be a lucrative market if she coordinated with the puppeteers among the bunnies. Unlike Kara, Opal didn't actually care about the money. She wasn't the loot-obsessed sort. However, if she could spread an army of Darklight Host-branded companion dolls across the immortal realm. But more than that, the possibilities for inspiration were endless. Staying here in the tiny world was great for content, but she really did need to spend a bit more time in the clan compound while they had more visitors. With an influx of guests, there would be one-night stands, whirlwind romances, fated reunions, even tearful dramatic breakups and heroic interventions by spurned suitors. Everything that a cultured romantic like herself could ask for. Carl heard Opal's thoughts on the matter and waited to see if she had any unique guesses on the answer. She loved to observe the various situations around her, while Carl opted to give everyone privacy and not closely observe the occurrences within the tiny world. If he wanted, he could see everything, and Opal made full use of that connection. But nobody else did. In fact, most of the others weren't even capable of it. Skills were shared among the team, but while Carl had a skill that made him compatible with everything that his beasts were compatible with, that didn't go both ways. So, there were still some limits on what the others could use and do with his abilities. Kara seemed to care very little about limits, and mostly used whatever she pleased, whenever she pleased. But the others each had a specific portion of his skill set that they could access. All this talk of fertility had dragged Remy out of her research lab, and the Naga had appeared next to the Black Dragon avatar with an armload of measuring devices and a notepad. These were the days that she was glad to have 4 arms. She needed them all if she was going to measure the aura he gave off while properly taking notes. If her suspicion was right, the aura of divinity might be just the thing that she needed to complete a fertility charm that didn't use nature magic. The immortals from species that were slow to reproduce would pay well for a pill that would greatly improve their chances when nature magic struggled. Good afternoon. The Avatar greeted the curious Naga, unsure what she was up to. Hello, Avatar. I'm just taking a few readings from your aura in the name of alchemical research. Do you prefer not to socialize with the rest of the group? Actually, I enjoy being around people. I've got a whole team down in the labs to talk to. I just get a bit focused on my work and forget that there is a world outside the lab. That reminds me, it should be almost time for a dungeon or something, right? We haven't gone on a trip for some time. Were you sent here to make sure that Carl wasn't trying to get a baby dragon? I figured there would be one of you soon enough after Lotus got one. The Avatar chuckled at the distracted tone Remy was firing off questions in while she wrote her notes. Indeed, I was sent here to make sure that Carl was not intending to subvert the hatchlings into following another pantheon. While the world dragon is a dragon in the most literal sense, he is not a part of the same pantheon. Letting the young ones be corrupted was deemed unacceptable. Remy nodded as she continued to scribble notes. That makes sense. While Lotus is questionable as a guardian in many ways, she is a follower of the green dragon. Hey! Remy shrugged all 4 shoulders.
What?
Am I wrong? If it was possible to suffocate to death in fluff, you might have done it by now. Ophelia burst into laughter, while Lotus glared at Remy. I will have you know, I contribute to this group. I didn't say that. You're our best healer, and arguably our best chef as well. But if you didn't have a werbear to cuddle you, there is a solid chance you would end up in the lake, sleepwalking toward the prospect of new friends. Lotus frowned. She couldn't argue with that. Tessa had often stopped her from sleepwalking out of the room by blocking the door. Chapter 1848. Educational Facility. The first bunnies came out of the tower about half an hour after they had entered, and they were all super excited to tell the world about the changes. I got to play a game of three-dimensional chess. It was so much fun, and when I reviewed the winning moves, I realized that what they played was a better version of my power matrix. Now, I just need to go make some changes, and I'm pretty sure that my growth will take off. One of the other bunnies nodded. I played a game about the various properties of magical ingredients, and it gave me a new recipe as a reward. The tower gives rewards? I thought it was just a trial. The avatar asked.
Yep.
It gives rewards now. It's pretty neat. I don't know if they're built in, like something that the Carl knows and left for us, or if they're from the gods, but we get rewards of some sort. Now both Remy and the avatar had notepads out, and the sight made Dana laugh. They both had matching focused expressions on two very different faces. The avatar's transformation was human, while Remy had a head more like that of a cobra, as all Naga did. There was a bit of difference, but the shape was still distinctly serpentine. But somehow they matched. So, that combination is enough to trigger a system reward for the trials? That is absolutely fascinating. I don't recall seeing any of the familiar markings of the system stones on it, but it's still linked to the system and granted the rewards. I wonder if that is something to do with the base being made by an avatar of the World Dragon? Or if it's innate to the design. We will have to test that once I get home, he muttered. Yes, much testing to do. This divine energy aura contains an essence of life that is different than any form of healing or growth magic that I have encountered before. More testing is needed, Remy agreed, on a completely different conversation than the avatar beside her. More bunnies began to chatter about their awards, talking over each other. That wouldn't stop Remy from taking notes, and Car was doing a fairly good job of keeping up with what everyone got. Mostly it was advice and knowledge. None of them had brought a tangible item out with them. That might be a limitation of the trial tower. Unlike the one that they were planning for the guild village, this one wasn't designed to give out loot. There was no need when everyone who visited it lived in the tiny world and could just ask for whatever they needed. But getting knowledge from the system that wasn't part of what the guild already knew was a huge win. They needed to tell Librarian Ike. He would have a great time with the bunnies, listening to all their stories as they explained what they had learned. All new knowledge was a win for the Blue Dragon, and there was plenty of it today. And there was more coming, as there was another batch of bunnies in the tower already. They were entering as soon as someone left, keeping the tower at full capacity until they had all had a turn. Then the lizard folk and demons wanted turns, and the dragons would surely be mixed in there somewhere. In fact, Yuan might be in there right now. Carl didn't sense the little dragon nearby, and he wasn't in the guild village or the clan compound. At least not where Carl could sense him. Yuan might like to wander, but he didn't usually do it alone. Tenna was still here, so he was likely in the tower, not outside somewhere. Sure enough, 10 minutes later, Yuan came out of the tower and immediately flew over to his friend to explain to her about this super cool special event that he got to experience. Apparently, the tower had given him a demonstration of the practical uses of death magic for purification, which he had never even heard of before. Naksha knew how to do it, but it wasn't on the curriculum for young dragons. She hadn't expected Yuan, who was always less than diligent about studying, to grasp the concept so quickly. But it seemed that the tower had a knack for teaching in a way that the little dragon could understand. Or a method that could keep his attention long enough for him to understand it. That was Naksha's greatest challenge lately. She was teaching him things that black dragons needed to know about their powers, but that meant Tenna was doing different lessons, and there were no other young black dragons, so he had nobody to talk to during the lessons, and that made him much more prone to wandering off or losing focus when he got excited. In Naksha's mind, that was simply a failure of scale. If they had more baby dragons, they would have multiples taking the same lessons. Most of the other lessons had a dozen or more hatchlings in them, which made it easier. But the black dragons needed to learn to control their aura much earlier than others, or they could accidentally kill the plants and small creatures. In a place like the tiny world, where everything was a high-grade magical resource, that was a disaster. Worse, it could corrupt the elements of plants he was near. And then they would end up with useless ingredients all over the tiny world. Ones that couldn't be used in alchemy or even eaten because of the death energy in them. It was highly toxic to most species, even if it was harmless to the black dragons. She wasn't sure if she could manage to rope the Avatar into helping her out, but he did look interested in what Yuan had to say about the lesson. The prospect of having the system help them out with training had intrigued the divine-ranked dragon, and he was determined to get as much information about this new tool as he could. The followers of the creator's pantheon had been keeping this good stuff to themselves in the divine realm, but soon he would know the answers that his clan's artisans needed to make their own. Chapter 1849 Igor. While the other black dragons thought of ways to properly raise Yuan, who was more interested in exploring, the recruitment event at the new home merchant clan was moving into overdrive, as the older cultivators had mostly finished their challenges, and now they were into the newly turned adults and the teens who were looking for a clan. Those were the ones that the clans really wanted. The younger you started on a specific path, the easier it was to adapt, so they all wanted to take disciples as soon as they possibly could. And that was causing an influx of customers for the Darklight host, who were desperately waiting on Carl to get them the higher-grade items he had been distracted from. Their frantic messages finally got him back on track, and Carl grabbed Rue to help him finish the items. All that they really had to do now was to create a batch of epic-grade items, which took a few minutes each, and they would be ready for him to use Breath of the World to upgrade them to Peerless. They already had most of the items for their regular sales finished. They just hadn't shipped them over, as they hadn't realized that it was an urgent matter. There were many other craftsmen, but they were all busy with the rare grade items and custom orders. Plus, they couldn't make the peerless grade items that were in the highest demand now that the elders looking for a single disciple had started to find their prodigies. None of them wanted to go home until they had managed to obtain one of these limited edition crafted items, and they were crowding the store to the point it was becoming difficult for anyone else to shop. Rue quickly got into the spirit of things and started carving random combinations onto epic-grade items, knowing that they would change with the advancement and might make something fun. If the bonus wasn't set, there was no reason to get super specific in your descriptions. Just get the right general spirit of things, and then let the skill do the rest. It might even end up better, knowing how the system loved random bonuses. While he absently answered Yuan's questions, the Avatar of the Black Dragon watched the two of them work, wondering what sort of insane person would buy an item that caused both petrification and testicular torsion on hit. Kara thought it would be hilarious when she suggested it to Rue. Carl and Rue both finished making a dozen immortal rank epic grade items with different bonuses, and Carl gathered them together, so he could use the skill in bulk. Both Kara and the Avatar watched with tense anticipation as the skill was activated, and the items underwent a fundamental transformation as Carl drained a massive amount of his mana to upgrade 24 epic-grade weapons. With a victorious cheer, Kara ran forward and grabbed the wand that she had Rue create. Poking Stick of Crippling Anxiety's cursed item. Immortal rank, Peerless grade. Adds a secondary effect to all skills that causes crippling anxiety to the target. The mere thought of retaliation or decision-making has a chance to cause paralysis, and any actions taken against the caster will cause crippling agony and have a chance to inflict a constant health drain of 1% maximum health per second for 10 seconds. Usable only by creatures of a chaos plane.
Yes.
It's perfect. The Avatar stared in horror at the weapon in her hands. While the status effect were not guaranteed, the wand was an absolutely horrifying weapon that caused 0 actual damage. Most of the time, the level of mental fortitude that it would take to ignore that spell effect was immense, and in the hands of a creature like a Chaos Badger, who surely had more than a few ways of weakening mental defenses, it would be catastrophic. But that was not the only truly odd item in the pile. Igor is currently in the form of a simple broadsword. Immortal rank, Peerless grade sapient weapon. Soul Drinker. When activated, Igor will cleanse the soul of impure targets with dark flames, then absorb the purified energy released to improve his own power. Adds 200% base skill damage as Dark Flame damage Deals double damage against water element targets. Hawk cheered in victory as the broadsword that Carl made with dark fire and life steal on it evolved into a sentient weapon. It was good before, but it was astonishing now. Igor would be a good friend to someone. You know that you can't just sell that to some random cultivator, right? The avatar asked. Carl stared at the sentient weapon, which flickered with blue flames in recognition. I suppose that you're right. In the wrong hands, Igor would be a menace. We should probably find just the right person to have him work with. I could give it to one of our own people, I suppose. Perhaps one of the new kids? Maish might be a mismatch, as her primary skills aren't flame-based. But Lucille is a wolf lord, and Igor should add dark flame damage to her golems. 8 werewolves with dark flames would be pretty overpowered. The avatar frowned, looking for someone with common sense to back him up. You couldn't just give a sentient weapon to a child. There was absolutely no way that could possibly end well. Why don't you sell Igor to me? I will find him a good home among the junior acolytes of the death god. It's a dark flame-based sentient weapon, so it should be at home in a shadow and death element environment. Carl shrugged. He hadn't been intending to make a sentient weapon at all. Normally, that should take a deliberate trigger, unless the weapon was particularly well suited to the evolution. Or random chance intervened. I don't see why not. Keeping a sentient weapon happy can be difficult, but I'm sure that you can do it. The avatar looked to his right, where the Haint Claw was currently helping a group of druids to plant trees. Keeping a sentient weapon happy was difficult? Wasn't Carl making his do menial labor? Chapter 1850. Bites the Hand. Sensing the attention of the divine dragon on her, the Haint Claw looked up from where she had been planting saplings cut from her own branches. In this environment, they should grow up into Haint Treants, not bonded weapons, but proper living plant monsters with very similar skills to what she had. That would be perfect, as the living weapons were considered an inferior form of the Haint Treants, created from a cutting and bound to the system. The avatar didn't seem to have any intentions of stopping her, so she ignored his intentions and went back to her work, while the druids used their magic to help the saplings take root in the fertile soil. Once they had a full grove of Haint Treants, nobody would dare threaten the tiny world again, she assumed. With a skill set that included Soul Steel, Force Slam, and Ghost Fire, they were a terrifying force to engage, especially when they were the forest that you were fighting in. The avatar collected Igor from the blanket where Carl had done the advancement and opened a small portal home. Nisha, I have found you a weapon for your test of skill. Bond with Igor and help him advance to legendary rank, and you will understand what you need to about the nature of dark fire. The teenage black dragon stared at the sword for a moment, before Igor flew over and poked her finger, testing her to see if she was worth bonding with. But she was a dragon born in the divine realm. Her essence was incredibly powerful. There was nothing to complain about. Hey, what are you doing trying to bite me at first meeting? Plus, you burned my finger. Igor remained unrepentant and did not answer her, even mentally. I see that this will not be an easy mission. I understand, Avatar. I will succeed in this task. Then the Avatar closed the portal and smiled at Carl. She's a fire mage, but she's been having some issues with the difference between the fundamental rule of fire and the divine law of fire. Fire with free will should help her with that difference, as one is simply a progression of the other, and it's not necessary to master a divine law unless you're trying to improve your combat power. He seemed to realize that he had said more than he really should have regarding the divine realm, but it was too late to take it back. There are better versions of the fundamental rule? Why don't I know those? Is there a book? You have to know them, right? You're a divine realm avatar, so you definitely do. Could you please teach me? Yuan asked, rattling off questions. The avatar patted the little dragon on the head. It's too early for that, little one. You have to already be divine to master the divine laws. You can't grasp them without fully understanding divine power, which you can't do until you can use it. So, keep working on things in stages, and you'll make it there eventually. Yuan sighed. That was what everyone told him. Do things slow. You're not ready for that yet. Focus on the task at hand. But he had questions. If he hung around the avatar long enough, he was bound to let things slip. He didn't know what the matron and Naksha were trying to keep from Yuan, as so much of it was casual knowledge where he came from. So, it was just a matter of asking the right questions to get all the answers that he could before the powerful dragon left. He didn't know how long the Avatar would be here. Usually they left in a day or two, but even that was plenty of time for him to ask questions if he skipped his afternoon naps. Yes, that would give him at least 2 more uninterrupted hours to ask questions. The Avatar saw the little dragon's mental calculations and already knew what Yuan was planning. But he also knew that the more questions he asked, the more he would wear himself out trying to understand the answers. And with a tired mind, the naps would become inevitable, and eventually, he would get too mentally exhausted to keep going. Carl sorted through the peerless grade pile and selected 4 warrior-targeted items, plus 1 healer and 1 caster-focused item, then added them to the shelf in the guild store. Avatar, my apologies, I must go tend the store. Please enjoy the hospitality of the Darklight host. They will take care of your every need while I am away, and I am certain that your concerns will be settled by the end of the month. Carl didn't see the look on the Avatar's face as he left, but the look of pure dismay made Dana laugh. The Avatar knew that he would be stuck here for at least a few days, but a whole month? Carl was just angling to have him passively donate divine energy to the tiny world for as long as possible. Perhaps if he just took the little dragon with him, that would solve the Death God's concerns? But if that was the solution, the god would have almost certainly told him to go collect Yuan, not to observe Carl and ensure that he was not actively trying to pull Lotus's bonded dragon into his sphere of influence. The interactions between the gods were always more nuanced than they explained to others, but even the Avatar couldn't quite grasp the extent of the concern underlying this situation. Chances were that the incident that triggered the reaction simply hadn't happened yet in the immortal realm, but had been seen in the divine realm, where time flowed differently. So, Carl and Yuan, plus the other members of the Darklight host, had no idea what they had done to get the Death God all riled up. And because they had no idea what they'd done, he couldn't ask the gods to tell him because if he knew, and it hadn't happened yet, there was a chance that he would accidentally cause it to happen by trying to stop it from happening. Which was one of the many reasons that seekers of the various dragon gods rarely asked questions and simply executed orders when they got a mission. It was better to take it on faith that things needed to be done than to delve too deeply into why.